Okay, so in this video today, I just want to talk about a real simple drill, something that is going to give you the correct feeling for the perfect hip rotation, which is often a question that I tend to get with many golfers. So there's a couple of things that we need to understand when it comes to rotation, is that you are trying to obviously trigger rotation and you're also trying to do things like keep your head still. So one of the things that plays a real big function in this is the ability to retain hip depth. I talked about this in a little bit more detail in a recent video where I talked about, look, when we trigger a rotation, and we also are very aware of the retention of hip depth, which basically just means if I draw a line here on the back of my hips, see the way my right hip moves back behind the line, and then as I come into the downswing, my left hip moves behind the line. Now, if I was to move more this way, you can see the way that I would lose that element of hip depth. And the problem when you do that is you also lose the ability to tilt. So if I move like this, you can see the way from a face-on perspective, the likelihood is that my head will move. So I would say retain hip depth, keep your head still, and still think about it as a rotational motion, okay? So what you would do is you get yourself set up and quite simply just put the club across your shoulders, take a width of stance which is the same as I'm demonstrating here, and then all you're going to do is you're not going to achieve a full rotation. Okay, so we're not going to rotate the shoulders all the way to 90 degrees. You're going to rotate the shoulders somewhere between 70, 80 degrees, something as again I'm demonstrating here. Now, as I position the golf ball, position it pretty centrally in my stance, and all I'm going to do is in the backswing position, I'm just going to get the feeling that the alignment stick would be, if you like, sort of pointing down to the ball, but theoretically it won't. It will point quite far above it. But what you're trying to do is at least get, from your perspective, the grip to hover over the golf ball from this perspective. Okay, so it's like so. So see the way I'm keeping my head still, I'm getting the feeling of my right hip moving back whilst I'm getting the butt end of the club to go over towards the ball. And then quite simply, I'm going to flip this over. As I come into the downswing, I'm going to do the same motion, completely keep my head still, and I'm just going to get the feeling of rotating and keeping my head still, like so. Now, the reason why I said that rotation was really key in this type of motion, and I talked about the importance of hip depth, is I think often happens is that golfers get slightly confused between when we talk about tilt, what that means, you know, and people kind of think, well, if it's just a tilt, I'll just do this or I'll just do this. So I think it's important to understand that as we rotate, but we're also mindful of maintaining hip depth, this produces a tilted motion of the pelvis. Now, the reason why this drill is so good is because it's not such an amazing exercise in the backswing, because it's something that you've probably seen a number of times before, but it is an amazing through swing movement. And again, the reason why is when I work with students, and again, I say particularly online students, because these are people that I don't get to. The brilliant thing with the online students is I have to create a drill that I know is going to work so that they can experience the correct feeling from a distance. Whilst with face-to-face lessons, obviously you can change things a little bit more sort of quickly. So when I'm giving information to online students, I need to know that it's going to work, and I need to know that it's going to give them the correct feedback. So, and what often happens is in the downswing, most amateur golfers understand there's a rotation, but they get about this far, you see. So in the backswing, you understand there's a rotation, and most golfers tend to rotate as to the degree I'm demonstrating here. But in the downswing, most amateur golfers only get to here. You know, or if I ask them, they might get to here. None of them get this far. So I think it's really an important thing that you have a go at doing this drill. Now, my last point before you go and try and do this exercise is I often think what happens in the downswing is, because when you're doing this type of exercise and you start rotating, when you put a lot of weight on that lead foot, what happens is it effectively immobilizes the hip joint to the point where if I sort of move my pelvis into my leg and I put a lot of weight underneath my left foot, it gets to the stage where I can't move. And that's why I really like with the exercises in the backswing, instead of thinking so much about left shoulder down, you want to think right shoulder up. And in the through swing, you want to think left shoulder up, because it's this motion here, this continuing of rotation, whilst maintaining my hip depth, that is giving me the ability. See, as my left shoulder goes up, it takes the weight off my lead leg, which helps me keep rotating. If I don't do that, you see the way I get stuck completely on this leg here, and I can't continue to rotate through. So it's a simple drill to practice. But often with the drills, and again, I see this a lot with my online students, it's not so much about doing the drill. It's about telling yourself what you're trying to achieve out of doing the drill. And that's why I think it's important. So try to ensure that you're always telling yourself it's a rotational motion. try and keep your head still. Be mindful of hip depth, and to practice that you can place a chair or something behind you. And then just finally, when you're doing this drill, so you've got your head still, you're treating it as a rotation, you're mindful of your hip depth, and I would just sort of say in the back swing it's right shoulder up, in the through swing it's left shoulder up, because that's going to be that ability to extend off that lead leg, keep you rotating through the ball. And that's when you tend to see the difference between an amateur golfer who sort of starts the downswing maybe okay, gets a little stuck in a little handsy, as opposed to a professional golfer who understands how to keep rotating through. And it's very much that type of motion that you're going to experience through this drill. See you soon.